So if you're like me and you remember growing up in a time when Nintendo had a dedicated home console as well as a handheld console, not the hybrid form factor that we see with the Nintendo Switch today, you may remember that all of the classic marquee series like your Mario, your Metroids, and even Zelda games getting both mainline 3D installments developed in addition to a 2D style game that was developed for the Game Boy/DS family of consoles. And in today's video, I want to boot up the most recent 2D Zelda game to make it to the Nintendo Switch and discuss whether or not we should expect Nintendo to continue to support the Legend of Zelda series with mainline 2D releases in addition to the AAA Tears of the Kingdom style releases going forward. What's up, nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, today we are booting up The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, otherwise known as the most recent 2D iteration of a Zelda game to make it to the Nintendo Switch. And of course, yes, it is a 2D remaster/remake. And the first thing I want to highlight that's really cool about that stuff that you see is kind of those cutscenes, art drawn, animated. They can add in story elements to the setting, the world, and the feel of these 2D classics if they go back and remake them on the Switch. But we are not talking about just remakes today, but rather also the idea on whether or not Nintendo will continue to support the 2D side of games. Now that you may remember, we've talked about Mario recently on the channel, but now that we're kind of in this hybrid era, it is essentially uncharted territory for Nintendo on how they may navigate some of these classic franchises going forward. Because once upon a time, and we have my finished file here, that was the last time I booted this up, and I'm in the top of the Windfish egg. Spoiler alert, you do get to go to the egg towards the end of the game, but we won't play through that section. We'll probably just play around in the overworld while we're discussing this. But you know, it was essentially one of those things that if you grew up during the era of gaming that I did, well, Nintendo could never quite, it always seemed like they wanted to merge together their mainline home console in addition to their handhelds, as they had different various ways that, you know, they could essentially, you could talk to, if you had the Game Boy, you could link it up with a Game Boy cable or Game Boy Advance to the GameCube, stuff like that. They were always working on ways to kind of integrate and make that handheld its second screen, similar to how we see not the Switch be a second screen like we did with the Wii U, but rather it just be one console that you have both, you know, the Zelda Tears of the Kingdom developed for and made on, in addition to this classic 2D Zelda remaster known as Link's Awakening, which, by the way, is a fantastic game. And you guys, if you're Zelda fans, there is a different feel from a 2D Zelda experience than what you get in a 3D grand adventure like a Breath of the Wild or even a Twilight Princess, or maybe what we can expect to be coming up with Tears of the Kingdom. Like, there are literally a different style and different vibe that you get, but it's so different yet still feels Zelda and still feels enjoyable. I would almost describe it to anybody who's played Metroid Dread after playing something like Metroid Prime. Yes, they're very different experiences, but they kind of have some of the core series formula and staple mechanics and staple puzzle solving type elements that you will enjoy if you are a fan of either one. And you know, while the art style in this game is debatable whether or not some people like it, I personally was not the biggest fan of it at first, but once you actually start playing through and seeing the detail in the world, and you kind of realize it is not a bad style for an original Game Boy game to be remade, and it's just very different than what you would typically see with, I think, any other Zelda games they may remake like this. But the big question being is, like, how does Nintendo now navigate these classic franchises like your Marios, like your Metroids, like your Zeldas in an era where the Switch is a one and all console? It's both the handheld and it's the home console. So we're kind of seeing, I wouldn't say the end of the 2D games being developed, or just you wouldn't even have to call them 2D, but rather, like, you know, the more DS, 3DS focused type of experiences that we used to get in addition to the home console experiences. What are those teams that made those games working on now? And we really don't know. We do know teams like Grezzo, which did, I believe Grezzo did this port, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. But games, you know, teams like Grezzo that often do remakes and remasters and things, are they just always going to be sticking to remakes and remasters? And maybe we get more games like Link's Awakening. We get in the future, we get the Oracle games brought over as a double pack and remade, or maybe we get ultimately something like Minish Cap remade. You know, do they just keep going through the back catalog, or do we see them actually start to develop from the ground up new Zelda experiences that kind of have that 2D or 2.5D, whatever they end up wanting to go? Do we kind of get those type of games as well? Because if you think about it, it's really a Link Between Worlds being the last new mainline Zelda game that sold alongside of the console releases, that was its own dedicated handheld title. And gosh, that was I want to say 2013, more or less, something around there anyway. So that's been quite a while now, if you really start to break it down and think about, you know, just how long it's been since we've had this. And I'm clearly lost in the forest now, which, you know, gosh, I enjoyed this game so much when I went back through it, but it has been just long enough that I have to kind of figure out my way around. But, you know, I'm personally in the camp of, I think that there is a market for both style of titles, and I don't think that Nintendo has to completely do away with this classic formula of Zelda games in this overhead view, or just a 2D form factor, to only focus on 3D Zelda games. And I guess that's the only thing that I would consider to be a downside of the Nintendo Switch era of gaming, is that we might be talking about things like less focus on these type of projects, because, you know, you would essentially be getting double the amount of Mario games and double the amount of Zelda games when they were being developed for individual consoles that met different experiences, being the DS, Game Boy, 3DS family of systems. All of those systems had their own mainline installments for all of the big Nintendo franchises. And now that everything's on the Switch, it's like, well, are we really seeing double the amount of Zelda games? I mean, this was 2019. That's the last, you know, real Link's Awakening was the last 2D remaster to come over. And I think with, you know, like this year being a perfect example, having no Zelda on a Switch in any way, shape, or form in terms of new content, I think this should have been the year that we would have at least seen something like, well, you know about Wind Waker and Twilight Princess and my hopes around that if you've been around on the channel for a while. But outside of those games, give us the Oracle games as a holdover, you know, give us Minish Cap ported over and remastered in this type of style. I can't remember where this teleporter takes me, but let's just hop in it. You know, so, oh yeah, these are, of course, see, I've forgotten everything so fast. If you guys have long-term memory, God bless you, because I'll tell you, sometimes if it's been more than a year or two, I might as well be playing a brand new game for me personally. In most cases, unless if it's like Ocarina of Time, where I literally, I don't know how many times, 30 plus beating that game. So that's a little bit of a different story. But, you know, this is one of those things where it's like, do they really just forego all of these classic 2D installments? And I think the answer has to be no. And I definitely hope that in years where it feels light on content as a Zelda fan, because, well, to be quite frank, we are, compared to what Nintendo typically does with Zelda releases on the Nintendo Switch. Well, yeah, that's when you bring over new projects and you port over old ones and you remaster them, or you just drop an entirely new. And that's what I would be most curious to see, is how Nintendo would feel about launching an entirely new, from the ground up Zelda game, similar in the style to A Link Between Worlds, in terms of just, you know, having something that's brand new story, brand new enemies, you know, everything is just from the ground up, an entirely new Zelda experience. Will they do anything like that ever again? It's totally possible. The answer is no, and that's a scary answer for me. So I'll be a big advocate always for the continuation of these classic experiences that, you know, if you grew up playing the Game Boy, and I was never the biggest handheld player out there, like the way I played most all of my Game Boy games, and that I honestly experienced most of the Zelda back catalog of games, because really when I became a Zelda fan was Ocarina of Time, and I went back and experienced A Link to the Past on the Game Boy player, and that's how I did it. So I was always a fan of Nintendo, you know, having those avenues to go back and play the classic games, to play the handheld games rather, on a TV screen. That's always how I've preferred to play like lengthy experiences. So, you know, regardless of how you look at it now, we don't need those type of attachments anymore. We don't have two different Nintendo consoles to develop. So what are they going to do with this version and this style of game that up to this point in time has been a historic staple for these series? And I just hope we're not talking about the end of an era where all we can look forward to is new 3D Zelda. Do I love 3D Zelda? Absolutely. Tears of the Kingdom is so highly anticipated for me right now. Like, I'm replaying Breath of the Wild currently in anticipation for Tears of the Kingdom. Fun fact, when I used to have all the time in the world to play games like that I wanted to, I would actually go through every Zelda not necessarily in chronological order, but basically in release order from when they came out, to actually try to get myself back up to speed with the entire series leading into releases. Like leading into Twilight Princess, I legitimately went through every Zelda game from the original all the way to Wind Waker in anticipation for Twilight Princess. And because it's a Zelda game and Zelda games get delayed all the time, I had plenty of time to do that. And unfortunately, I can't do that now, but I can at least go through Breath of the Wild from start to finish again. And I am loving that. So it's like, yes, I love 3D Zelda. I always will. It'll always be the biggest thing I look forward to, especially new adventures, or God forbid if they ever do a true up remake of Ocarina of Time with modern graphics and modern overhaul visuals. I really feel like they did Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time on the wrong system personally, because while I love those remasters on the 3DS, I also don't want to only be able to play them in handheld or have to emulate them. So I hope we still get something like that brought over in the future. Again, to the Switch. You can say that Nintendo ports their own stuff too much, but you know, the point is yes, I love 2D Zelda, I love 3D Zelda, but I think that there's a spot for both of them, and we really just have to wait and see and hope that this isn't really the end of an era, and that these projects are not just ultimately viewed in Nintendo's eyes as maybe not a focus anymore, because you know, yes, Mario got some 2D love with, you know, New Super Mario Bros. U ported over. Not necessarily the best example. Did very minimal work to that game and brought it over to the Switch. But, you know, and then you had things like the New Super Mario 3D World, which is more of a 2.5D or overhead style experience, but definitely not a mainline 3D Mario. Like, they're kind of tinkering with some of their back catalog of games and bringing them over that way, but they're really not doing anything in terms of brand new experiences. So that's where I want to hear from you guys specifically around this in the comments down below, is like, where is your, you know, nostalgia fall for 2D Zelda games? Do you want more of them in the modern era, or do you think that all resources do need to be put into brand new 3D experiences and these were just a product of their time? Also, let me know, if you were a betting person, what do you think is the next 2D Zelda title to get maybe remade? And do you think that we only see remakes brought over to the Nintendo Switch, or is there a place that brand new from the ground up 2D Zeldas can also live alongside of these brand new 3D releases like Tears of the Kingdom? So I'm definitely an advocate for the classic experiences coming back over, but regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch the weekend video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.